are rocking and rolling, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Rich Sports Talk, your home for all the latest and greatest on the New York Jets. It has been an intriguing free agency period. It has been 1 week officially, but as the free agency revealed how the New York Jets will attack the draft. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rich Sports Talk. Thank you again for joining us. If you're new to the channel, hit that like and subscribe button right there so you don't miss any of our latest content because we will be leading you up to the draft. And don't forget, next Monday for Mock Draft Monday, yes, it is the first one of the year, the first official 7-round mock draft will be unveiled. The first of many will be unveiled. So again, guys, make sure you do not miss any of that. That is coming next Monday, the full 7-rounder, the whole shebang. And if you want a first round for all 32 teams, let me know in the comments. Let me know in the community page what videos you would like to see in, of course, future videos. So the New York Jets free agency has been intriguing. There has been a lot of discourse online, and I've seen with the Jet community, where I think, in general, I can define two camps through the free agency. You have one group that looks at this and looking at Aaron Glenn's comment that they want to compete right away, feeling a bit underwhelmed that the Jets haven't pulled off a big move necessarily. I would argue by getting a starting quarterback in Justin Fields was a big move, but I understand where some people are looking at that as not that big of a move, especially being a downgrade technically from Aaron Rodgers. And I can understand that opinion. I think the other thing is looking at how the Jets have attacked this free agency and the players they are targeting. But more so, I was really thinking about this today because I say this all the time on this show. Coaches can tell us anything. They can tell us online, they can tell us in press conferences, but I always say that actions will always speak louder than words. And what the Jets are telling you in free agency is, number one, they did not think that this was a great free agency class, nor did they think it was a free agency class to really go overboard on and really spend a ton of money. The other big thing, too, is we are starting to see a bit of a shift in free agency. And I think a lot of it has to do with two very important factors that impact the National Football League. Number one is the cap, significantly going up year after year after year, another $20 million. And you look with Cincinnati, I think was a perfect example. We felt that one of the two receivers, probably T. Higgins, was going to reach the free agency market. There's no way they're going to pay Jamar Chase, pay Joe Burrow, and T. Higgins. What's it going to be, a flag football team on defense? Well, apparently they can, and they were able to pay both of those receivers. You look at the Jets. Their best free agent was Jamien Sherwood. They were able to lock him up and keep him. Really outside of DJ Reed, who, again, is 28 years old, probably has another year or two in his prime if you're hopeful, maybe 3 if they're lucky. You look at the Jets, the free agents that they lost, wasn't really a big thing because you look, they're guys in their 30s, guys that you don't want to overpay and get locked into bad contracts. But I wanted to think about something first. And again, let us know in the comments. You want to jump to the front of the line or make a donation, use that super chat feature to jump to the front of the line. One thing I think that's very interesting, and I'll talk a little bit more about the players the Jets have targeted and how I think that will impact the current draft. I think this free agency has also been very prevalent in targeting next year's draft. Because as it would stand right now, the Jets would likely get a 4th-round compensation pick for the free agency period. Now, this is big. They might even get a 7th, but the 4th is huge because when you consider that they traded a 3rd-round pick in next year's draft to get Hassan Reddick, getting that asset back will be crucial. Now, again, it won't be the same as a 3rd-round pick, but it's still a nice asset to have. And I was looking around the league, and I do think it is clear that when we talk about well-run organizations, the Philadelphia Eagles jumped to the front of that list. Now, when the Jets signed Joe Douglas, many thought he would follow a very similar model to Howie Roseman. And I do think he did a couple things like Howie, but in terms of acquiring picks, I don't think he really did a great job. Now, the Eagles have won the Super Bowl. The Eagles, though, have loaded up in next year's talented draft because think about what they did. They brought in a lot of guys who on one-year contracts, and they outperformed their contracts. And now they've gone to other places. I saw a stat where the Eagles next year's draft are going to get a third, a fourth, a fifth, and a sixth-round comp pick for all the great players they lost. Now, again, you can lose great players when you have a Super Bowl roster, and they've built that up incredibly. But I also am looking at teams around the league going, why are we overpaying for B free agents when if we don't pay for them and we lose veterans on one-year contracts or guys that we didn't really value get overpaid and we get rewarded for it? Why wouldn't we follow that plan? I think you're seeing that with the Eagles. A great example is look at Mekhi Becton. They basically took Becton off the scrap heap, gave him a one-year prove-it contract, and as great as Becton was last year, it's clear to me that they can say all they like about Mekhi Becton, but when you had a mid-20-year-old who had a great year as a guard and you were that eager not to re-sign him, especially when you have movement on that offensive line, I think it is very telling what the Eagles were doing. Now, let me circle this back to the Jets. How does this play with the Jets? Now, I brought up this year, and I think this year is very important because you look, Morgan Moses got a big deal. DJ Reed got a big deal. Hassan Reddick inexplicably got a big deal. And I think the Jets looked at the free agency period and going, why are we, especially in a more talented draft next year, and we're trying to build this the right way, why would we overpay? Why in God's name would we overpay for a C+, B free agent, A money, and lose draft picks? It does not make sense. Now let's look to the players that they've brought in. What are the players that they've brought in are very interesting. They're all on one-year deals, mid-20-year-old players who you are hoping have a bit of an upside. Now, I do think there is a certain trend that will impact their draft strategy, but before I get to that, let's talk about the guys that they brought in. They brought in Derek Nandy from the Chiefs. They brought back Kenny Nwangu, which, again, I thought was a great signing. They brought in Texans Chris Boyd, Tyler Johnson from the Rams, Jay Tufolo from the Bengals. They brought in Stone Smart from the Chargers, and Andre Cisco all on one-year contracts. They also brought in Reeves signed Jamin Davis, one-year deal, had 8 career sacks. And you look at all these guys, or what do they have in common? They're in their mid-20s. There is a scenario, and let's play a little game. Let's get that fortune teller's ball in front of us, and let's play a little game. Let's look ahead. This is Nolan Stradamus. Let's play a little game. Let's say, for example, let's use Cisco as a great example, the free safety. Cisco has already had multiple interceptions in his NFL career. He's 24 years old. Is there a scenario in this defense where maybe he has a great season, has great coverage grades? Maybe at the end of the year, I'm not saying a Pro Bowl player, but he has 3 interceptions and is a ball hawk and is a game changer. Maybe when it's time to re-sign him, the Jets look at his value, look at it 25, and they go, we'd like to keep him, and maybe they can get him on the right deal. But maybe Cisco is getting in his ear from his agent and from around the league, you could be one of the highest paid safeties in a depleted market. You're going to get top dollar. You're going to get A+ money. And maybe the Jets look at it and go, we really like him, but we got great value for the price point, and we don't think he's worth that much money. If Cisco signs a massive contract next year, what happens? Well, the Jets get rewarded with a comp pick. And I know what a lot of you are saying, well, if you have a great player like that, why would you just let them walk out the door? And I'm not saying you just let them walk out the door, but if they don't fit your price point, or you have a guy that, let's say, for example, they draft a safety on day 3 and they feel he's ready to step in, then you're a little bit more open to letting them walk. Maybe with the budget of signing Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson. And again, Jets, get that done because that price is just going up and up and up. But sticking to the point, like let's say if one or two of these guys have, I'm not even saying great years, but solid years. Like let's look at, for example, at Jamin Davis. Now, he was a former first round pick who we see first round picks get plenty of opportunities. 8 career sacks. What if he has a couple sacks and looks really good in this defense next year? If he hits the market, maybe there's a team where the Jets decide, like, okay, we wanted, he's a high priority, but someone's going to give him X amount more than we're comfortable. Maybe get a pick back. Maybe Quincy's a good example. Maybe Jamin Davis plays so well that Quincy, they don't give him a long-term deal. Quincy hits the market at 30. A team gives him a high annual, maybe 1 or 2 year contract, but pays him 12 to 15 million a year, maybe even more. That will also lead to a comp pick. I look at a guy like Stone Smart. Again, this is a guy who has changed positions to becoming a tight end, looked really good down the stretch. What if he catches 35 catches next year? What if he catches 2 or 3 touchdowns? Maybe someone will look at him as a valuable player. What if Josh Myers, who the Jets have on a 1-year, $3.5 million deal? God forbid one of the offensive linemen goes down. He plays 12 or 13 games, looks really good. Maybe he at least is something. Then you look at Chukwuma Okorafor. I can never say the name right. But again, he's started 60 career games. He's 27. What if he fills in for 8 or 9 games, looks really good, and at 28 hits the market again? I mean, we saw tackles get overpaid. So I do think that the Jets are taking smartly shots on younger guys who they're hoping can pan out and not overpaying for veterans. And I do think that they are handling it the right way. But if they also don't love the player long term, they might get rewarded on the other end of it, like with what Howie Roseman did with Mekhi Becton. He took a shot on a former first-round pick that was in his mid-20s and was seemingly potentially on his way out of the NFL. He plays in a great new system. He is benefited. He has a good season. Gets a little uncomfortable what they want to pay him long term. They turn him over. He helped them in the short term, but in the long term, he's going to lead to a comp pick. So again, this is a new game that these general managers have to play in the National Football League. And I really like what Darren Muji is doing. Now, again, I know there's a lot of frustration about how this team hasn't gone out and gotten a receiver, how they haven't gone out and gotten a tight end. And the one narrative too, and again, I see your comments, make sure to use the super chat to jump to the front of the line. One of the comments that I find is incredibly frustrating, I'll go on a little bit of a detour before I get to some of your comments, was I can't believe Aaron Glenn, no one followed him here. I can't believe Tim Patrick didn't come to the Jets. I can't believe none of the former Lions came here. But then I also have 2 counterpoints to that, very simply. Number one, who went to Chicago with Ben Johnson? And number 2, if you are a player for the Lions looking for a short-term deal, which pretty much all of them were at that point, would you rather go to the Jets who have a 14-year playoff drought, or would you rather go to a team that's not only a really good team, has been a really good team the last 2 years, but a team that we count as a Super Bowl contender with maybe 4 or 5 other teams, really? So if you're going to take a shot, go with the team that's right now the better team. I think the Jets are building the right culture. I think they're doing the right steps to building the culture. But for people saying, "Oh, I can't believe no one from the Lions wanted to come play for the Jets." Well, yeah, they're on a Super Bowl contending roster. Why would you leave? So, all right, guys, let's get into your comments. Again, super chat to jump to the front of the line. Danger Zone, of course, Rondell Moore visiting today. Tet McMillan. I'll talk a little bit about that, and I'll also go through my mock draft next week of who I have the Jets taking at number 7. But the thing is, and I do think that Scott and Dane have done a little bit of the day drinking. Look, Rondell Moore's basically been going around all offseason looking for teams. So I do think that the Jets are maybe looking a little bit into that market. The 2 guys that I really we're kind of leaning on for the Jets to make a move at wide receiver. Uh, the two ones I really wanted, the first one was Slayton from the Giants, which I was really surprised that he was staying with the Giants, especially with how their quarterback situation is. The big one would have been Josh Palmer. And people say, well, why didn't they offer the same contract the Bills did? I think they could have offered a similar, but again, do you want to go play with the MVP of the league, or do you want to play with, again, and I do like Fields as a fit here, but there is clearly a difference, especially when you are a wide receiver. So let's see. As we get into here as well, who should be paid first, Garrett Wilson or Sauce Gardner? Sauce Gardner. So I think Sauce will get paid first, just because I think it's the easiest, because you just make him the highest paid defensive back. And right now, if I'm the Jets, I'm working to knock that out. Garrett's a little funny because, again, I think he should get more than T. I don't think he should get as much as Jamar. The hard part with him is I do think Garrett Wilson has the potential to be a top 5 receiver in this league. But the big problem the biggest problem with him that I foresee is he's going to be the number 1 paid receiver, where with Sauce, I think it's a little bit easier as the number 1 corner. With Garrett, I think there's is he Justin Jefferson? Is he really the best receiver in the National Football? And it's clear, bare minimum is a top 8, probably closer to top 5. The hard part with Garrett is we just haven't seen it with the quarterback. So I do think if I had to put money on it, Sauce goes first, then Garrett. That's like being surprised that someone didn't leave Apple to follow you in your risky Silicon Valley startup, LOL. Okay. Kayuka would rather Warren, pass catcher and blocker, and get Higgins in the second to play wide receiver 2, need a tight end 1 badly. We'll talk about the draft in a little bit, but I will say, speaking that we are going into the draft, I do think that one of the big things we have to look at for the draft is how this team approach free agency. And I do think it is clear that the Jets have sent us a couple of messages, and not only how I think they're going to approach the draft, but how they're going to approach this team this year. If you are expecting to have a lot of split wide sets, have 3 or 4 receivers on the field this year and over 45% of the snaps, I think you're going to be very disappointed. I think what the Jets are telling you is they're going to run a lot of heavy 12 personnel. They're going to try to run the ball. And if they, in a perfect world, they don't want to throw the ball more than 35, 40 times a game. Because of that, I think what the Jets are looking for is a developmental receiver, maybe 2 in the draft, a tight end or 2 in the draft. But one position that I find a little bit interesting now is, I think one position that I was talking about being a top day 1, day 2 pick potentially, I think they don't address until day 4 now. Sorry, day 3. I'm just getting the rounds. I meant round 4 for day 3. I think that the defensive tackle position is now a position where I do think they will draft a defensive tackle, but I would almost put that they will draft a pass rusher or an edge before they go deep tackle in this draft, or an outside linebacker potentially, just because they've added 3 big bodies in free agency. They've added 3 defensive tackles. I think they like what they have in Leonard Taylor. So now all of a sudden you got 5 defensive tackles in this room, and I feel like if there's a great value pick in this draft, maybe they'll go and get a D tackle. But I think what this tells you is if you're expecting, for example, Mason Graham at 7. Now, again, if he's the top of the Jets board, maybe they'll splurge. But I almost feel like you can rule that out. And again, would Mason Graham be an improvement over these lottery tickets that the Jets have taken? Absolutely. And I understand that. But it is clear that I feel like this team is comfortable going in with this beefed up defensive tackle room. I think I would not be shocked they added another defensive tackle veteran. I know they've added Weaver as an edge. I do think you could see them adding another edge, whether it be an outside linebacker or defensive end in the draft. But to me, when I was doing a lot of the mock drafts, I felt D tackle could be a top day 1, day 2 pick. And now I feel that they're going to look for, if anything, a developmental guy on day 3. So looking at some of the other needs, I look at tight end, and it's a bit of an interesting one. Now, again, they've added Stone, which I think was a nice upside move. It seems that they're going to be keeping Jeremy Ruckert. And I know everyone's kicking and screaming that Allen Lazard's still on this team. My thought with Lazard is that the Jets, again, they already have their 2 post-designated June 1st cuts. Now they can cut basically, I think they're going to hold on to him until after June 1st and then do it after June 1st just so they have the depth. I also believe that Lazard is almost like a little bit of a cookie where the Jets know Rodgers is gone. I mean, they've already cut him. But whatever team, and again, the Aaron Rodgers like indecisions also causing a lot of problems because like basically whatever team does not end up with Aaron Rodgers now, especially if it's the Steelers or the Giants, I feel like it's going to be a big disappointment. But I almost get the feeling that the Jets are holding on to Lazard with the hope that Aaron wants a toy. Now Devontae's in LA. So maybe the Giants call up and say, look, Aaron wants his toy. We'll swap a 7th for you, or we'll send a 6th round pick to you, or we'll send a player that's lower on our depth chart but fills out a need for you. So I think Lazard being on this roster is almost basically a little bit of a cookie for Aaron Rodgers because we know he loves certain players to play with, and Allen Lazard is one of them. Now, in terms of the draft, the tight end position will start here. I think it is very interesting to see that the Jets basically kind of have 2 tight ends on this roster already. Now, the big question is going to be when they address it in the draft. Now, Tyler Conklin is still out there. I think that if the Jets get him for the right price, I would consider bringing him back. But it does also tell you something, there hasn't been that much of a market for him. The other thing I would avoid too, and speaking of the Eagles, who we talked about earlier, it's clear that the Eagles are looking to move on from 2 players. One I might be interested in, I'll bring him up in a second. But the other one was Dallas Goedert. Now, Goddard, would I give a draft pickup for Goddard? Sure. But where the Jets are at this point, looking at trying to build a mid-20s roster, I don't think it makes sense to give up a pick for Dallas Goedert at this point. Even though I do think he'd be obviously the number 2 pass catcher in this offense. I mean, basically the Eagles are giving him away and they could get like a 5th or 6th, but I think he's going to have much higher value than that. That it just doesn't behoove the Jets to make that move. Now, if Bryce Huff is available, the big question is going to be, does he fit this Jet scheme? Because again, he fit really well under Robert Saleh and Jeff Ulbrich. He did not fare very well last year in Philadelphia. If Aaron Glenn thinks he can be a valuable edge or rotational piece, maybe I would consider it. But again, this all comes down to Aaron Glenn and how Muji judges it. I think why the Jets have been more relatively quiet on the tight end market is because they are looking at getting a tight end in round 2 or 3. I would not be shocked if they double dipped and they got another tight end on day 3. So I did see that Daniel Jeremiah released his latest mock draft, and he had Membu from Missouri going to the Jets at number 7. The more this process goes on, I feel like the Jets are leaning maybe more toward that. Because the way the Lions were built was smash mouth football. And again, I know the Lions can throw the ball all over the yard, but they also have a 2-headed monster and they can run the ball down your throat. And with the Jets, I look at this tackle class, and it's like a lot of tackle classes. You have some very intriguing ones in the top 3, but there is a significant drop off. And while there is some very good interior offensive linemen in this draft or tackles converting to the interior, I don't see really a great early day 2 guy that could be developed into a starting right tackle. Now, I've seen Tyler Warren get put up there a lot. And I will say this again because I feel like I have to defend myself, because I do like Tyler Warren a lot. I think Tyler Warren is one of the top 10 players in this entire draft. But when you're looking at a draft, you also have to look at what is its strengths and one of its tight ends. If the Jets can get a 10-year starting right tackle at pick 7 and still come out on day 2 and pick 42 with like a Gunnar Helm, maybe a Mason Taylor falls, and getting a starting caliber tight end on day 2, that could be worth it. I mean, we see tight ends and good ones fall to day 2. George Kittle fell to day 2. Sam Laporta fell to day 2. And those were in classes that had nowhere near the depth that this tight end group has. So I will not be sure. I think the Jets are easily going to draft a tight end in the first 2 days of the draft. Probably will draft 2 at some point on day 3, which leads us to, we talked defensive line, we've talked offensive tackle, we've talked tight end, which leads me to receiver. And again, guys, use the super chat feature, jump to the front of the line. Again, I see your comments coming. I will get to them in just a second. Wide receiver is a very intriguing position. This is a funny wide receiver class. I think that there is a lot of talent in this wide receiver class. There's 2 things where I would be a little bit wary with this wide receiver class. And if you're expecting the Jets to spend a high pick on wide receiver, why you might be disappointed. When you look at a lot of the guys that the Jets are targeting right now, outside of Tet McMillan, again, probably Tet will be there within the top 10. I feel like the Jets, they are looking more at the projects on day 3, or they are kind of hoping that maybe a day 2 talent falls to early round 3. That could also be in play as well. I just look at this draft class for wide receiver, and I look at the Jets. I feel the Jets are going to approach the wide receiver room in a very different way. Because to me, the wide receiver group or the wide receiver position for this team is likely going to be the icing of the cake or one of the last moves that this team makes. And I get it. This is a playmaker league. This is a receivers league. You want to have playmakers on the outside. You have someone else out there beside Garrett Wilson. I get all of that. But the thing is, when you look at the Jets, what is more important to the long-term success of this franchise? It's finding a valuable tight end. It's finding a starting right tackle or a long-term right tackle. It's potentially finding a valuable defensive player. And I look at this draft and I just look at where the receivers are probably going to fall. And when I also look at this draft as well, I look at basically the wide receivers. And I do think there's some very intriguing ones, but I think Luther Burden, Emeka Egbuka, I think they're just going to be out of range for the Jets, probably in round 2. Do you reach then for like a Jaden Higgins from Iowa State? Do you look at like a Trey Harris from Ole Miss? Do you look at a Jack Beck from TCU in round 3? Do you look at Tez Johnson maybe in round 3? I just get this feeling that the Jets are going to really use the front end of this draft to address a lot of the other holes before wide receiver. Heck, I would even go as far as to say maybe a quarterback. Maybe if Jalen Milroe or one of these guys is sitting there on day 2, I feel like the Jets, if they feel there's a good developmental quarterback, they might pull the trigger and trade up from 73, or they might hold at 73 and take the best guy available. So if that's the case, and for example, let's say they go tackle, let's say they go tight end and quarterback. Now, again, I think those are key cornerstone pieces for the long-term success of the franchise. I just look at the wide receiver group. It feels like every time you're like, maybe receiver, it just feels like there's another more important need. And I brought this up in the last episode. Of all the positions you can add to a team, receiver is probably one of the easiest. Like, let's put it this way. if the Jets needed a piece of the trade deadline, you can get a receiver. Receivers get moved at the trade deadline all the time. And especially in this year, let's play a game. If the Jets are 4-3, or let's say 5-3, or they're a game about 500, or they're a 500 team at the trade deadline, but they feel that they can compete for the playoffs, I think that there will be a team that will take a draft pick for a veteran wide receiver who can become your number 2. And the other reason I would also consider is think of the draft next year. If the Jets get to the point where they're at the trade deadline and they feel, look, we're probably closer to a playoff team than a top 10 team. As much as we would like the quarterback, we're obviously not going to tank the season at this point, because even if we did, we're not going to get close enough. Does it make sense to hold on to a 5th round pick or a 4th round pick if we can get a really good receiver that helps us? Where you look at these teams in the bottom 5 who are basically tanking at the midpoint of the season and are going to want as many draft assets as possible, especially next year. There's going to be a rush to get assets for these quarterbacks. And if the Jets are in a position, now again, if they're in a position where they're not close, don't give up those assets. But if they're like second in the AFC East, or they're in the top 8 of the playoff picture and the veteran receivers available for a good price, I would make that deal in a heartbeat. And that is a deal that could easily present itself. You're not finding a starting tackle at the trade deadline. You're not finding a usually elite edge rusher at the trade deadline. But you know what you can find? Very productive wide receivers. And I kind of feel like that's going to be the last position that really the Jets really look at. James, and again, super chats jump the line. We need to draft tight end, D tackle, wide receiver, safety, and quarterback. I would also agree those are the Jets' top needs. Can this staff cut Clemens? I don't know, man. Maybe they're just making him suffer a little bit. But I, to be honest, look, he's also a player that's under contract. He's a mid-round pick. So I do kind of get the feeling that maybe the Jets will let him just attend camp, much to the chagrin of every Jet fan right now. But man, I just, again, the Jets aren't going to basically let him go. And like, if he's going to be cheap option, it's basically a camp body almost. I almost put like it's a camp body at this point. Let's see. Saving $3 million and finding someone easily replacing him late in the draft. I bet Weaver beats him out in camp if Clemens lasts that long. Well, yeah, they clearly like Weaver. And again, Weaver was the guy they brought in, they signed. And if it comes down to a former player that they don't have any rapport with, I always lean toward those guys. Most teams do void years. Chiefs do in other teams. Just an easy way to spread the cap. Nobody knows when your team is winning. Jets fans just see it because all the deal sucks. Look, that's the other thing too. The Jets, they're paying like 8-9 players that aren't on this team anymore. I don't think that they're also going to put themselves in more of a bad cap situation as much as possible. And look, I do not hate Tyler Warren. Guys, didn't I say in the chat, I think he's one of the top 10 players in the draft? How does it mean I hate him? It'd be different if I said, oh, he can't catch, he can't run. No, I think he's a very good player. My thing is he's the best player at his position. But the thing is, there's a lot of very good players at his position that I can get great value on later in this draft. Like, let's put it, you draft Tyler Warren at 7, fine. 42 comes up. Well, you know, we could have gotten another starting tight end, but, well, okay, the tackle's a bit thin. Okay, that pass rusher just went at the top of the first round. These receivers, like, I could make a case at 42 that there are 2 or 3 tight ends that could start for this team and potentially be the week 1 number 1 tight end. Where I look at pick 7, yes, I do think Warren would be a good pick, but I just think there's better fits for what the Jets need long term. And the other thing with Warren too, and I like the player a lot. I think he's an incredibly talented player, but the thing with this draft is incredibly deep at the tight end position. It is not deep necessarily at right tackles. It is not deep at certain positions where if I'm the Jets, and I also think this just sounds like another, yeah, we're going with Devin Smith. It just sounds like, again, and here's the thing. I think when the Jets draft the tight end, he's going to be one of the top 3 pass catchers on this team. The other question is, how is this team going to utilize Breece Hall in the passing game? Is he someone that's going to get 5 catches a game and be utilized more as a passing option? What do they think of Malachi Corley? There's certain players on this team that we don't know how this current staff views them. And the big thing I look with Tyler Warren, if the Jets draft him at 7, am I going to have a meltdown? No. Would I be a little bit disappointed? Potentially. But the thing with Tyler Warren, this is just how it feels to me. And tell me what you think as Jet fans. It feels to me it's the FOMO pick because of Brock Bowers last year. Now, again, I still think the Jets made the right decision to get Olu, who I think is going to be a very good left tackle for a very long time. But the thing is, everyone's thinking Tyler Warren is this year's Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers is also a unicorn. He is an elite pass catcher. If Brock Bowers was magically placed into this draft, we can be making a case that after Travis Hunter, he would probably be the number 2 overall player in this draft. And maybe we're having discussions in the top 5. Does a team in the top 5 take him? Does Tennessee, if they don't love a quarterback, take him to be an elite pass catcher? Do the Patriots take him at 4 to help Drake May? Like, that is a scenario. And look, I'm not saying Tyler Warren is a bad prospect. I'm not saying Tyler Warren isn't a gifted and talented tight end, but everyone's like, almost, it just feels like this to me, that Jet fans are making it like, well, he's this year's Brock Bowers. He's a very good tight end, but he is not Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers was someone that we had not seen in a long time. And look, maybe there's certain things Warren does better. Do I think Warren is a much better blocker than Brock Bowers? Yeah, I think he's a better blocker. And maybe for the system, overall, he's a better fit. But Brock Bowers is also an elite receiver. Like, he is clearly the number 1 pass catcher on the Raiders. And look, I get how good that Warren is, but there's some still really good, like, everyone's like saying, well, Warren's an A tight end. I agree, but there's also a lot of very good tight ends in this draft. Like, everyone's just like poo-pooing, like, oh my God, this tight end class is terrible. There's some really good tight ends in this draft. Colston Loveland from Michigan, I think can be a really good player. Mason Taylor, who is someone that I really like, who was incredibly productive at LSU and is a 6'5" body who can block. Elijah Arroyo is a dynamic pass catcher out of Miami. Even Gunnar Helm, and I understand he had the foot issue, but I wouldn't say, maybe I'd trade back a little bit, but Gunnar Helm, very productive at Texas. I thought he was very good. And even Terrence Ferguson out of Oregon. I mean, these are guys that I can see making an impact within the passing game. And I understand how good Warren is. And I understand that Warren is a talented player. But we're now talking about last year at 11, that the Jets passed on a tight end, and now they're going to pick at number 7 a tight end. Like, if Armand Membu is a starting right tackle for the Jets for 10 years, that is incredibly valuable and so difficult to find. And I understand that Tyler Warren is a tantalizing prospect. And like, I will say this again, if the Jets somehow ended up with Tyler Warren, preferably in my opinion, they trade back a couple spots to get more capital. But if they make that card on round pick 7 in April and they make Tyler Warren the tight end, I will not be upset. I will still think they took a top 10 and talented player who makes them better offensively. My question then will become, okay, you have now made your bed with Tyler Warren. He's clearly your number one tight end. He's probably your number two pass catcher in this offense. How do you, as the Jets, address the rest of this draft? Because you passed on potentially a great starting right tackle at pick number 7. You possibly passed on a great wide receiver in Ted McMillan. Like, let me put it this way. What if the Jets go out and instead of Brock Bowers, sorry, not Brock Bowers, instead of Tyler Warren, again, though, the tight end talk, if instead of Tyler Warren at 7, they take Ted McMillan and then the best available tight end in round 2, would that potentially be better that the Jets not only got 1, but 2 very good weapons they arguably get after Travis Hunter, the best receiver in the draft, and they could still potentially walk away with one of the top 2 or one of the top 3 or 4 tight ends in the entire draft to help this offense? I mean, those are guys that are potentially there. Like, here's another one. What if Travis Hunter is somehow there at number 7? I mean, we've seen weirder things in the draft happen. What if by some miracle, like one of these quarterbacks, what if Shedeur Sanders falls to 7? Again, I personally wouldn't take him there, but we have to see what this front office believes and how they evaluate the talent. And look, I get that Tyler Warren is a very good football player, and I understand that he is a tantalizing player in this draft, and he fits a big need in this draft. But what if there is, like, what if Abdul Carter's somehow there at 7? I doubt he will be, but there's a chance. What if a team also, you're sitting there at 7 and the phone rings and they want Ashton Genty and they'll give you a bunch of picks? Like, here's my thing too. There's a lot of really good players in this draft. And I do think that when we talk about great players, I will say this. I think Tyler Warren is one of the top 10 players in this draft. But I also, on my board, have Ted McMillan ahead of him as a playmaker. I have Armand Membu ahead of him as a dynamic right tackle. If the Jets walk away with their 2 keystone tackles for 10 years, that is a really hard thing to do. What the Lions do with their tackles is very difficult to replicate. And maybe they go a wild card with Jalen Walker. Personally, I don't love that. But I just it just feels like every time I see the Jets, it's Tyler Warren and no one else. It's Tyler Warren and no one else. I do think that Warren is a very talented player. I do think that Warren helps with the pass blocking, helps with the run blocking. I get that. But when I look at this draft, it just feels like if the Jets selected another talented asset at pick 7 or traded back, they could get much better value in this draft. That if they walk away with Ted McMillan and then a tight end in round 2, you would feel a lot better than if they reached for someone in round 2 or they drafted someone in round 2 that maybe isn't an impact player. Maybe they draft a tackle, but they're not ready to go in round 2 where Membu is ready to go from day 1. Maybe instead of Ted McMillan, now all of a sudden you have your number 2 receiver and your starting tight end from round 2. Now all of a sudden you're trying to figure out, okay, can this receiver make an impact? Do they really fit our scheme? Do they fit here at round 2? So to me, it just feels like if you don't draft a tight end with the first pick in the draft, you have a lot more options. Now, if by some miracle, like let's say the Jets propel back a couple spots, maybe there's a team, like let's say Mason Graham is there, sitting there at number 7. Maybe a team wants him and they want to jump the Panthers and the Saints. Maybe Shedeur Sanders is there. Maybe that there is a player there that has a better value that you can get more assets or get assets for the long term. I would look at it. And look, if you traded back, I think that there is a scenario where maybe there is a couple of really good players that could be out there. So if I'm the Jets, I'm making sure that I give myself and this organization as many options as possible. But it just feels like if the Jets are just going to walk up there and take Tyler Warren, I just have this feeling that, again, you have more options if you don't draft him at that spot. And I kind of get the sense with the free agency that I look at the players. Yes, they've interviewed Bourne, but they're looking at a lot of tight ends who will probably be there in round 2. I'm looking at the receivers. It's Tet McMillan and then guys who are probably there round 3. So maybe it's Tet and then he could be at the top of the board. I just get this sense with what the Jets have done in free agency to bring this home. They have filled a lot of crucial potholes. They have done a lot to fill out this roster where they're not desperate for a quarterback. They're not desperate for certain positions. So the biggest positions, though, that I feel this team is desperate at is right tackle now, which I think elevates them to be more aggressive potentially in the first round. I think they've had a lot of depth to the D tackle room. Again, not maybe great depth, but depth where all of a sudden, instead of drafting a defensive tackle more early in the draft, maybe they wait until day 3 to address the position. I still think that they will look to draft a tight end in the first 3 rounds. I suspect more in round 2. But if you're the Jets, I think what this free agency period is, they've done a very nice job with 2 stages of the draft. They've done a great job in the long-term planning to potentially get more comp picks for veterans that weren't going to be here long-term and getting to bad contracts that prevent them from getting comp picks. But more importantly, I think they've done a very good job of filling a lot of key holes where they're not desperate to go and get a safety. They're not desperate to go and get a corner. They're not desperate to go and get a linebacker. They've done a nice job of filling out some nice backup positions where all of a sudden, like the biggest needs, and I get them. Safety, I still think is a need, probably a little bit more down the board now. But quarterback isn't as desperate to need. I still think wide receiver, tight end, offensive tackle are probably the 3 biggest needs on this team right now. And I do think they will all get addressed in the draft. The big question will be is what will the roadmap be to fill in those key potholes? Thank you so much for joining us here on Rich Sports Talk. A friendly reminder, if you're new to the channel, hit that like and subscribe button because next Monday, we will have our first 7-round mock draft where we will mock draft the Jets from round 1 all the way through round 7. You're not going to want to miss any of that. Check our community pages for all the latest on the Jets. And of course, if you're a Jets content creator and you want to be on the show, make sure to reach out to me through the YouTube page. And again, guys, we will be here throughout the Jets offseason with all the latest and the greatest on the New York Jets. Thanks so much for joining us here today. I look forward to seeing you next time here on Rich Sports Talk.